I'm Roger Wood. I'm speaking with Dr. Dante Scala of the College of Liberal Arts, a professor in American politics, and Andrew Smith. Andy Smith is head of the University of New Hampshire's Survey Center, both extremely well versed in politics, nationally and regionally. As you well know, gentlemen, uh, long-term senator, senior senator Jeanne Shaheen of New Hampshire says she won't run again in 2026. That would be a fourth term for her if she ran. And she said, quite appropriately, she has a great family, and I don't think she wants to miss all of their growing up. She's got a wonderful daughter, four wonderful grandkids that are all very, very well respected and advancing in their different educations and fields. And I think she wants to be part of that. Loving husband too. So it's important. How about your thoughts on her announcement? Anybody?
I don't think it was terribly unexpected in the state. I think that there is a sense that she was going to um, not go for another term. As you mentioned, she's got big family and she's been in this business for a long time, back into the 1990s as a governor. So it's an awful long time to be in public service.
It's sense of timing is important in politics, and typically we find, as we found with the former president, politicians always think they can win the race in front of them, whether it's for the first time or, for Jeanne Shaheen, it would have been her eighth run for statewide election. She won six and only lost one in 2002. So I think politicians are just hardwired to think, one, I'm indispensable, like a lot of us think that, right? But politicians especially so. But then also I can win the next one. So I'm sure part of her, when someone like Chris Sununu would say, she's beatable, I'm sure part of her was saying, oh yeah, sure, I took care of your brother, I'll take care of you too. But it's good to know when to walk away, right? And I think I'm of the philosophy you should try to leave a little early rather than a little too late. And so I think Shaheen looked, and she's always been ruthlessly pragmatic, I think, when it comes to elections, but it's hard to do that when you're in your own case. Sometimes it's hard to be pragmatic. And I think she's leaving at a good time when Democrats have a good chance of keeping the seat. And as you say, she can move on and do other things. And it's refreshing to hear a politician, think about having a life outside of politics. I think that's more the way it should be for a lot of politicians.
That's sacrilegious there, Dante. Uh,
I'm trying to sound more like you, Smith. I want to beat you to it.
oh boy. Yeah, I think that's Dante makes a really good point here. Jeanne Shaheen was a party person before she was a elected official. So she worked on campaigns and really understood the ups and downs of the campaign cycle. And she was a partisan Democrat. But again, before she got into be an elected Democrat, she was working within the party. Uh, and I think that looking at what's coming up, 2026 is likely to be a very good year for Democrats, both in New Hampshire and across the country. And if you want to make sure that your party is in charge, that you don't lose the seat, well, this is probably the best time for her to do it, both because 26 is going to be a good year, but I think there are two people, kind of obvious candidates with our two congressmen here in New Hampshire that are, I think the party would take either one of those as a positive and run with either one of those two as a candidate and feel pretty good about their chances.
Yeah, but just quite a career. I mean, six wins for statewide office. That's one better than Judd Gregg, right? That's better than any Sununu ever did, at least so far. You have to go back to Styles Bridges in the middle of the 20th century to find someone who had been that successful at running for statewide office. So she was really a fixture. And when Andy and I moved here, Democrats were the lovable losers, the Chicago Cubs of New Hampshire politics, right? They lost a lot more than they won. And Shaheen's movement, as Andy said, through the ranks from activist and operative to candidate to state senator to governor. I mean, she really blazed the trail for what became the sea change in New Hampshire politics. And I'm not saying she did it all by herself, but a lot of, again, for politicians, it's a lot about timing and seeing something there that maybe other people don't or are a little fearful of taking a chance on. You know, you go back to the 90s, you know, Bill Clinton carried the state twice. It was a weird time nationally. You had Ross Perot running and so forth. So there was hope for Democrats, but, you know, someone had to take a chance and break the ice. And that was Jeanne Shaheen. And, you know, as Andy said, she was an operative, a party person before she was a candidate. Sometimes what always struck me about her that was distinctive was she understood the nuts and bolts of campaigns, you know, from working for Jimmy Carter or Gary Hart in the New Hampshire primary. But sometimes those behind the scenes people, you know, they can't be the face of a campaign. They can be the behind the scenes person, but she was comfortable doing both. And that always struck me as something that was distinctive about her.
I would think I've met her as governor mostly, and I found that she was quite straightforward. Would you agree with that?
I think so. I think that was one of the things that made her a formidable opponent politically, both in New Hampshire and nationally, but also that she didn't seem to come across in her demeanor as she could tell you no and you didn't really feel bad about it. She didn't make you feel bad. So it was she had a solidity, but it wasn't like it was insulting like a lot of politics today. I don't know if that was just a change of era that we're in or whatever, but maybe it's because she cut her political teeth in an era where the Democratic Party in this region was the minority party. So she had to work across the aisle to get anything done. So whatever it was, I think that I find that I wouldn't call her necessarily a bipartisan senator, but somebody who's certainly willing to work with Republicans either in New Hampshire or nationally.
I remember in the fall of 2008, she came to a forum. You know, she was running for her second time for the U.S. Senate after losing in 2002. So it was a rematch against John Sununu. And it was the fall of 2008. And I was sent out to greet the candidate. And, you know, the forum was public. And so there were a bunch of people from Sununu's, you know, Republicans, I guess, or they were from Sununu's campaign who were out waving signs and, you know, yelling and doing the sort of things that campaigners do. And I was a little, you know, I was new to UNH and I was trying to be a good host. And I was just trying to think how I was going to handle the situation when she got out of the car and was confronted with these, you know, campaign rowdies and so forth. And she got out, cool as a cucumber, turned to one of the people from the opposing campaign and introduced herself. You know, like, Jeanne Shaheen, nice to meet you, right? Something like that. And just diffuse the situation. And I just think, like, nowadays, you often see, Andy was talking about changes in politics. It always strikes me how candidates now seem to be in a bit of a cocoon. And you always got to protect them. They can never admit doing anything wrong, right? You've got to, like, wrap them up in cotton. And Shaheen wasn't like that. You know, she isn't like that. And I think she was, you know, I'm sure she took her share of knocks being, you know, not just a politician, but a female politician. But she, you know, she gave as good as she got. And she was able to handle things in a kind of a low drama way that has really set the tone for a lot of Democrats. Like, you think about Maggie Hassan, you think about Chris Pappas, you think about Maggie Goodlander, you know, a lot of them, you know, they all have their own personalities, but they're very much kind of like in that no drama mode of Jeanne Shaheen.
She's not done yet, by the way, gentlemen, professors. I mean, she's in office through what, 2026. I mean, so she's still a senator until then. She can get things done, I'm sure.
Well, that may be one of the things that's happening for her, and maybe made retirement sound better, or not retirement necessarily, but leaving the Senate sound better, is that she'll be in the minority for the next 2 years, and being in the minority in the legislative branch is no fun. You don't have the power you did as a committee chair. You don't have the ability to set agendas as much. You're reactive, and it's also, given the structure of Washington today, it's an unpleasant atmosphere. So I think getting out while you can, I don't think she'd want to endure much more of that.
It'll be interesting to watch, Andy, the next couple of years. You know, she's the ranking minority member on Senate Foreign Relations. She's taken a lot. It's interesting how much of a portfolio she's built up in foreign affairs. You know, especially concerning Ukraine and Eastern Europe and so forth. So I'm curious to see, again, as she starts to wind down. Obviously, that's on the front burner. What she'll be trying to do in terms of, I'm sure from her perspective, salvaging U.S. foreign policy in Europe, and will she be able to find ways to work across the aisle to try to counter where Donald Trump appears to be going in terms of U.S. policy regarding Europe, regarding Ukraine, and so forth. You know, as Andy said, it could very well be a frustrating time, and the president obviously has an awful lot to say about foreign policy, and it's really his call a lot more than the ranking minority member's call. But it'll be interesting to see if she tries to find ways to work with more internationalist-minded Republicans to try to counterweight what Trump's doing.
Yeah, and I'd say she does have an advantage there because in the Senate, most of those internationalist Republicans tend to be the older people who've been around in the office for quite a while. Not as much changeover as the House gets.
Now the question is, who'll replace her? Who wants to start talking about a wide open race?
Well, it's certainly wide open race. On the Democratic side, I could see that the two obvious candidates are Maggie Goodlander, the newly elected Congresswoman over in the second CD, and then Chris Pappas in the first CD. I think both of them would be welcomed by the National Party. Pappas, because of his he being a known commodity and then successfully elected. Goodlander, both because she got elected here, but that her time in the Senate, her and her family's closeness with the kind of the Biden wing of the party, there's still a lot of money there and a lot of support that she's built up in DC. So I think both of those candidates would be very acceptable, and they've both shown to be very electable. And I think that the Democratic Party is in good shape with either of those two. I'm sure that there'll be other ones, but I think those are the two obvious ones right now.
Question is, right, who steps forward? And if one steps forward, does the other step aside? And it's a bit right now, I'm sure there are a lot of conversations going on behind closed doors and so forth, but you know, we're long past the days where the state party can decide. I think if both of them decide to go for it, I don't know that there's anyone out there in the party who can stop them. Like even Jeanne Shaheen, right? Even Maggie Hassan. What can they do? And that raises, I mean, it would be a fascinating race to watch as a primary. You know, you'd have to go back several decades to find anything equivalent where two sitting members of the House of Representatives in New Hampshire go after a Senate seat. But again, it's a bit of a game of chicken, right? Like I'm curious, like what they're thinking and Like if one of them steps forward first, inevitably someone's going to be first. Uh, will that persuade the other to say, okay, I'll wait? And I don't know, but it's, Maggie Goodlander doesn't strike me as the type of politician who waits to take her turn, right? And so I think I suspect, based on what I saw last year, where she handily disposed of Colin Van Ostern, a long time party member. I mean, he really had that argument to make in terms of I've paid my dues and she hasn't. Problem was voters weren't especially interested in hearing that argument when they saw Goodlander's other assets. So I could buy that she has the fire in the belly. I'm curious about Chris Pappas, right? I mean, this is the obvious next step up the ladder, right? I mean, he's done basically everything else you can do in New Hampshire politics except run for statewide office. But remains to be seen. Like, again, if Goodlander basically says, "Hey, I'm doing it. Best of luck to you, Chris Pappas," do you give up the job you've got, right? Well, you're very comfortable. Like, I'm sure he could win several more terms in office if he wanted. Do you give that up in order to go for the next rung on the ladder? Do you want it that badly, knowing that a primary will be difficult after seeing what Goodlander did to Van Ostern? Now, I would put Pappas several levels above Van Ostern, right? Obviously, a sitting congressman, but it'll be curious to see who puts the pressure on whom.
That's one thing that the Democratic Party's been very successful at in New Hampshire is discouraging top level candidates to go against one another. They generally cleared the field, and I think this might be something that we could put back to Jeanne Shaheen. She was really able to make sure that when she was running or other Democrats were running, that they were, there wasn't a bloody conflict that's going to divide the party. I think she probably saw that in the 1980s, going back to when Jimmy Carter was challenged by Teddy Kennedy in the primary. She's being a Carter person, sees what that can do to a party. So I think that this is an opportunity, as Dante says, where you've got two people that I think they could do things independent of what the party leaders can straighten out for them right now.
I'm really curious.
Want to go? This is the time to do it. This is a great time if you're a young Democrat. Your chances of winning the general, I wouldn't say are guaranteed, but they're pretty darn close. This would be a good chance to reach for that brass ring. But the one thing you've got to keep in mind, who knows how long Maggie Hassan is going to want to stay down in Washington as well. She's not exactly a young person down there, even though she hasn't served that much, as long as Shaheen has. But she might follow Jeanne. She followed her up the ladder. She might follow her back down the other side.
Yeah, we've seen this over and over again, right? Where the smart play seems to wait, the prudent thing seems to wait, and then you wait, and then that opportunity never comes around again. It looks like it's going to be out there, but then you wait and it's not. And
you wait at least 6 years, gentlemen. You wait at least 6 years.
And a lot, obviously a lot can change, and all of a sudden things have shifted beneath your feet. And I am curious whether, if you think back to Pappas's 2018 congressional primary, where he faced Maura Sullivan, who was a newcomer to the party, had a lot of resources and so forth. In that primary, Hassan and Shaheen weighed in on Pappas's side. Now, whether they would do something like that in this primary against a sitting congresswoman might be a different thing, right? And we have to also think about outside groups, right? Like Emily's List, very powerful pro-choice women's group. How will they weigh in? They haven't been shy in the past. So there's a lot to consider here for both candidates as they go forward. But again, Goodlander, I don't, she doesn't seem in a mood to wait. I mean, based on, again, we could certainly say, I mean, I was thinking about this on Wednesday. Yeah, I mean, yeah, she just started and so forth. But, and I think these days with primaries, it's interesting to think about, do primaries still split the party the way they used to because we're all so polarized? And so it's easier for the party faithful to, even though they might have voted for the losing candidate in a primary, to still get on board anyway, just because they don't want to see the opposing party get into office. So maybe that makes primaries a little, that argument maybe is receding in importance.
Do you think that, go ahead, Andy.
No, go ahead.
Do you think that both parties will be pouring lots of effort and money into this election?
I think it depends on who the Republicans actually have to do it. If it's Chris Sununu, they'll pour money into it. If it's not Chris Sununu, I'd say they probably aren't going to spend as much. I think Scott Brown is the other Republican that's being talked about. I don't think he has the um, I don't think he has the political skills and support within the state that Sununu would have, and I don't think he would have the support within the national party that Sununu would be able to get. I know that he's not exactly seen as a MAGA Republican, but there are a lot of other Republican groups, Republican organizations that would be more than willing to support a more traditional Republican than some of the MAGA Republicans out there, and I think and I think he would be somebody that would be a formidable challenger. And if he's the nominee, I think that the Republican Party will put money behind him because they want to win as well. And I think given what the likely landscape of 2026 is, they're not going to have a whole lot of other Republicans to support.
I mean, I agree with Andy. Sununu's the obvious A-list candidate, right? Popular governor, former governor now, but we've seen that, that worked for Shaheen, that worked for Hassan, that crossover from governor to senator. I do have a couple of things that nag at me about Sununu. One is his long history of kind of, sort of, never Trumpism, where he, it's a long list of, I mean, Sununu's never been shy about getting in front of a camera. So there's a long list of comments and so forth. And of course, he supported Nikki Haley against Trump during the primary. Now, we've seen Trump forgive before, right, and get behind people who opposed him. That's true. But it is kind of it would be more of a marriage of convenience. And I do wonder whether Sununu would bristle a bit as the Trump presidency goes on. And we see, we've already seen quite a lot in the last couple of months. And the idea that Sununu would avoid the temptation to speak his own mind for a year and be a loyal Trump disciple in running for Senate. I mean, it's one thing to be off the reservation in a manner of speaking, right? To be the person who is the maverick when you're a governor. But when you're running for the Senate, that's a different thing, I think. And now, I guess we've seen it with Susan Collins to some degree, Lisa Murkowski, but it's Sununu will be tied to Trump in a way that he wasn't as governor. And I'm curious how he would handle that, especially if, as Andy says, the environment starts to sour for the Republicans going into 2026. The economy goes south, all those sorts of things. Sununu will be tempted to be that mavericky Republican, and I'm curious how that would play out in that setting.
Yeah, I think that becomes a problem because I think either Goodlander or Pappas, should they be the nominee, would be more than willing to take some of the more moderate Republicans in the state over onto their side. If he gets painted as either a Trump acolyte by his by having to be kind of a Republican, and supported him during the presidential campaign. I wonder how many people he's antagonized both the Trump people and the anti-Trump people to a certain extent within his own party. And how many of those people would be more than willing to go over to a Pappas or a Goodlander, who, if they are running, they do well to position themselves more towards the centrist aspect of the party, kind of like Shaheen has. Um, you could see both of them being able to attract some recalcitrant Republicans.
Hmm. Do you think if Sununu did declare that he'd get a free ride from the Republicans through the primary? Because it's the seat's so important to them, right?
Um, I'm pretty sure that there would be at least one, probably more than one, Trumpist Republicans in this state that would be more than willing to run just to stick it to Sununu, I think.
If I were Scott Brown, I'd try to get 5 minutes with Trump. I mean, Brown's been loyal in a way that Sununu wasn't, right? He got in line, he was Trump's ambassador, etc. I would I would try. I think it's worth it. If I'm Scott Brown and I want to, this is my one last chance maybe for statewide office, I'd give it a shot. The thing about Scott Brown, he's just unlike Sununu, right? Who has a quote for everything. There's a reason for almost any type of Republican to be aggravated at something he said. Scott Brown basically keeps his head down, and he's sort of that classic kind of B plus candidate. He's not outstanding, but he doesn't bother a lot of Republicans, right? He's sort of like your generic, like he's perfectly okay. And as Andy said, it might not be a good year for Republicans. I think that's very possible. So Brown might not have that extra gear, but I do think there's room. I do wonder how the last time Sununu had to run in a competitive primary back in 2016, it was a tough one. Like Frank Edelblut, remember him? He almost pulled it off. And so I do wonder whether there would be more difficulty than you would expect. Although I do think Andy's right. There will be a lot of national Republican money coming in for Sununu, and they might shut off the faucet for others. I think that's certainly, especially if Trump gets on board and basically issues a Truth Social post giving Sununu his blessing early on. That would be tough to overcome. I guess wonder will Trump be in a mood to do it? You tell me from day to day.
One of the things that Scott Brown has done pretty well, I think, in his last couple of years is he's become not a fairly regular person on Fox News. So he's been able to speak to that wing of the party, the Trumpist wing, I would say now. And I think they would trust him on things and as regular voters. And I think he could potentially, or Trump could certainly potentially motivate a lot of those folks to start a real push for Scott Brown, but it would be a nasty thing. And I think that they'd prefer to do it without Sununu and having to attack Sununu. But I think that the people that he could attract would be more than willing to attack Sununu from the Trump side if they had to in a primary.
I just remember, Andy, in your polling, I was struck by how when Sununu was talking, kind of musing about running for president, like there were a lot of Republicans who were perfectly happy with him as governor. But when it came to running, for national office or for federal office, a lot of those New Hampshire Republicans were no, I don't think so. So I'm just
our little Chris president.
Yeah. So I'm just kind of curious how all that would play out. Sununu's really carry themselves a certain way. They see themselves as the leaders of the party now, then, forever. I could imagine that rubbing some Republicans the wrong way. Can they do something about it? I don't know. But I bet the feeling would be there to do something. Like we don't want a Susan Collins Republican.
Well, I'd say that Chris Sununu would be hard to be confused with the Susan Collins Republican. Yes, he's changed his mind on things, but he's more than willing to express himself and exactly why he's right and you're wrong.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Well, professors, there'll be a lot to chew on for not only you as observers of the political scene, but also your students. So this will be fascinating for them as well, I would think.
Yeah. Also some jobs available too. A lot of new campaigns.
There will be money flowing in.
Yeah.
Thank you both. University of New Hampshire professors Dante Scala and Andrew Smith, experts in the field of politics.